Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work. Welcome back, wildlings. Sometimes we have to find alternatives, either because we, for some reason, can't get the initial target of our desire, or because it's simply no longer available. Keep your thinker ticking on that as we journey into today's tale, the Flesh Interface series, post 81 through 85, by 9 Mother 9 Horse 9 Eyes 9. 81st post, the beginning of a story. Right now, the car is headed silent down the highway. It's dark, and there's nobody driving. I snuggle up in my seat and listen to the hum of its parts. I've turned my set off. It shows nothing but reports of destruction and plagues. The world on fire. The world gone mad. Most of the interstates have shut down. They want people to stay in one place. The car is moving along the back roads, switching from one lonely little highway to another. We're headed towards the answer, hopefully, towards the key to defeating Q. I hope we get there fast. Slowly, the sky pales and the blue curves of the mountains emerge from the darkness beyond the guardrails. I heard once that the Appalachians used to be as high as the Himalayas. Looking at the sloping hills under the sky, I can sense the ancient shapes of the world. A world that was here before us. Man, I'm getting pretty philosophical. In my mind, another shape appears. Massive, continental. The slope of human decline, the awful descent of the human race into... Oh, Christ, let me just enjoy the pretty mountains. Karen is lying in the back. She's doing another eye treatment with equipment that we took from the hospital. Before we reach Plattsburgh, the car switches highways and heads west. The sun climbs higher. We're getting closer. Eventually, the car turns onto an unpaved road. After a few minutes, it slows to a stop. And here we are. I look around. It's a nice bit of scenery. Grass and trees and gentle hills and blue sky and pretty much fuck all. There's nothing here, or whatever is here is hidden. Karen's still doing the eye treatment in the darkness of the van's rear. The light from the goggles seeps out in little flashes, sketching the shape of her face. Finally, the goggles turn green, and she pulls them off, blinking and squinting. I go and help her sit up. "Can you see me a little better?" I ask. She looks down at her hands, moving the fingers slowly in the dark. "Yeah." "Persistent shapes?" She raises her hand into a shaft of sunlight shining in from the front of the van. Her fingers catch the glow. "My hands," she says softly, her voice quavering with disbelief. It's the first strong emotion I've ever heard from her. "Good. That's great," I say. "Well, we're here. What do we do now?" She looks at me and smiles maniacally. "We go into the forest," she says. Her smile is unnatural and stiff, more of a grimace, really, than a smile, but for a brief moment, as it first spreads across her face, she looks like a giddy little kid. "The key is there," she says. "What is? Some kind of secret underground base? Hidden laboratory?" She makes a groaning sound that I barely recognize as laughter. "You play too many narratives. It's much simpler than that." I unfold a wheelchair that we borrowed from the hospital and help her into it. When I open the back doors of the van, she winces against the broad sunlight. She winces against the bright sunlight, and again her face looks like a little kid's for a moment. I give her a pair of huge black wraparound sunglasses that we also took from the eye treatment center. The van lowers onto the ground, and I roll the wheelchair out onto the dusty road. She makes sure that I take a bag of supplies with us, snacks and drinks and other stuff. The sun is warm on my skin, but the breeze is fresh and cool. It's a perfect day. You'd think that everything is right in the world. So, where to, I ask. She looks around her, her head wobbling on her thin stalk of a neck, and her eyes hidden by the massive glasses. There was once a house here. Do you see it? I look around and spy a low, crumbled, gray wall mostly hidden behind the grass. I think I see an old foundation. That's it, she says. Her eyes are hidden, but there's something in her voice that wasn't there yesterday, a shivery excitement. It makes me excited, too. I push the wheelchair down a weedy gravel driveway toward the foundation. There's nothing else left of the house. It must have been torn down and hauled off. Karen has me push her around it and go down a trail leading towards the forest. What was that house? I ask. Was it anything important? I used to live there. I turn around and give it another look, as if I would somehow see some new detail in the crumbling concrete that I'd missed. That was the old children's home? Yep. Then where are we going? We're almost there, she says. It's close. We follow the trail into the forest. The trees become thick and shadowy. The wheelchair has a little power assist, but it's still tough to push it over all the roots and the rocks that lie along the narrowing, twisting path. Oh, yes, Karen whispers excitedly. Up ahead, sunlight gleams through the branches of the crowding trees. A wave of excitement moves through me, and I push Karen faster. We come out into a clearing, a broad patch of wild grass that glows green and golden in the sunlight. Here, says Karen. I stop the wheelchair and look around. At first glance, there doesn't seem to be anything here. So, what's here? I ask. I used to come here as a child and play make-believe before I was connected. I take a walk around the clearing looking for something. A hatch, a hole, an actual key lying in the grass. But there's nothing. Across the clearing, Karen is slowly pulling off her sunglasses. When her eyes appear, they startle me. They're wide and gleaming with utter fascination. I walk up to her. She's staring at something. Tears fill the rims of her eyes and spill over. What is it she's looking at? It seems to be something right in front of her, something I can't see. I stand beside her and crouch so that I can see what she's seeing. There's nothing there but a small cloud of gnats. What are you looking at? I ask. She looks all around and takes a deep breath and shudders. There's more, she whispers. More what? They said that the feeds were complete, but they were wrong. I wait for her to say more, but she doesn't. What do you mean? I ask. She looks at me and smiles, the most goofy, crazed smile I've ever seen, tears still flowing down her cheeks. The designers of the feeds said that it provides a complete experience. Enough colors, enough frames, enough smell gradients, enough complexity to make it indistinguishable from reality. But they were wrong. Here, look at them, she says, raising her hand into the air. You mean the gnats? Yes. The gnats are glowing specks dancing senselessly in the sunlight. I wonder if some pattern will emerge. Can Karen control them with her mind? Is that the secret? Are they forming shapes? But they just dance and dance, forming nothing, making no pattern that I can see. I feel silly for even thinking that they would. They're gnats. I turn away. A flood of angry thoughts rushes through my mind. Gnats. Fucking gnats. She's a nut. She's lost it. Yeah, she's powerful and impressive in the feed realm, but now she's in the real world. and she has completely lost her shit. And this whole trip has been a waste. Is there anything here? I ask. What's the key? Seriously, don't give me any of that bullshit like I can't explain or you'll see. Just tell me. What are we doing here? What's the plan? I ask, almost shouting by the end. The crazed look of joy fades from her face and is replaced by the look of a scolded child. She lets her head hang and wipes tears from her face with her weak little hands. I feel bad. I kneel by her chair and say, Karen, I'm sorry. Please, just tell me what your plan is. I need to know now. Karen begins speaking softly without even looking up. Q has base control of every major system in the world. Every drone, every rover, every defense robot, all the orbital assets, all nuclear weaponry. She has control over most human political systems. She's destroyed or contained every existing countermeasure, including me. There is no scenario in which we could ever require control. Not with 1,000 times our current resources, not with 1,000 years of computation time. So then what's the plan? What we need is a way for Q to be destroyed by just one or a few motivated individuals. I believe there were points in the past where this could have happened. Maybe one of the Germans overseeing the early research program could have stopped it. Maybe it could have been stopped around 2020 when the portals were shut down and interface research was temporarily abandoned. But that didn't happen. Currently, at this point, there is no way for it to happen. Q has control of far too many assets. The war's already lost, irrevocably. Then what do? We must hope that there are alternate timelines and that somebody in one of these timelines foresees what is happening to us right now. That somebody foresees this very moment in time and takes steps to prevent it. I stare at her. She looks into my eyes. I grope for words. Is that... Wait, alternate timelines? That's the plan? We have to send a message back into the past? In a sense. Then the person who receives this message will destroy Q in the past, and that will save us? Karen shakes her head slowly. No. That clearly won't happen, or everything would already be different. We are utterly doomed. We'll either be incinerated by a nuclear strike or rounded up and incorporated into Q. There's no stopping that. The only hope to defeat Q is on some other timeline, if such a thing exists. There's no hope for us? At all? Then what are we doing here? Why are we in this fucking clearing? Haven't you felt it? Felt what? The feeling that you're inside a narrative. An eerie shiver comes over me. I look around the clearing. Like I'm inside a feed? No, inside a narrative. A story in somebody's head. Doesn't this all seem like a story? Two people rushing off to save the world to find some hidden key in a forest? Yeah, it all seems pretty unbelievable. That's how I wanted it to feel. That's why we came out here, so that we can be inside a story. Now, hopefully, there's somebody out there in the past who will write the story. Write the story? What, so there's nothing here? There's no magic key or underground base, no. Well, this story sucks. Why? It's a huge fucking letdown. Karen makes a mild choking sound that might be a chuckle. I slump down into the grass beside her wheelchair and hang my head. I'm out in the woods with a crazy person. She doesn't even make sense. She's spent too long in 5D. She's talking about alternative timelines. Finally, I ask her, so we're just fucked, right? If you look toward our future, if you look at the series of events which will happen to us, they're dark. They're very awful. We will suffer, we will die, but that would be true in any timeline. On the other hand, if you look at the entire story, not as a series of events, not from beginning to end, but as a single continuous connected shape where every event is occurring simultaneously, I think my life, even my stupid little life, which I spent mostly in that hygiene bed, could form a beautiful shape. I snort. I'm so tired of this bullshit. Karen goes on. Maybe that shape reaches back to some place where somebody can see it and change things. I don't say anything. Karen reaches into our bag of supplies and pulls out one of the little paper notebooks that she bought at the gas station. What are you doing? I ask. I'm going to write a poem. You want a notebook? What for? Maybe there's somebody out there who needs you to write a story. Who would read it? Isn't everybody going to die? Who knows? She says and drops the other notebook into my lap. Maybe somebody would be interested. I toss the notebook off into the grass. Fucking pointless. I can barely write on paper anyways. We sit in silence for a long time. When I look up, Karen is staring at the same little cloud of gnats, occasionally jotting stuff down. I find myself staring at them too. They look like nothing more than living specks of dust worked into a crazy, whirling frenzy. Is there any pattern in how they move? Would it matter if there was? I think about what Karen said about the shape of her life, what it would look like if everything happened simultaneously, if it could all be seen at once. I think about the shape of my own life. I stare at the gnats and I imagine seeing every position and every change of every gnat all at one time. What kind of shape would it make? Even if I could see it, would that shape have any meaning? I pick up the notebook and I begin to write. 82nd post. We all have skeletons. Before writing this series, I wrote a novel. I worked on it for 6 years. Worst years of my life. As I sank deeper into alcoholism and became a pathetic, trembling recluse, I held on to the novel as my one desperate hope. Maybe it would turn out well. Maybe it would get published. Maybe it would sell well. Maybe my life would change. Maybe I would escape my stinking little apartment. What dreams I had. What desperate little dreams. As my life got worse, I told myself I was on a journey of self-discovery, that I was an artist going through a period of struggle before my great breakthrough. Every famous artist has some story of living in a tiny apartment and working a mind-numbing job and eating crap food before their first big success. Surely, this was just that part of my story. How much richer would my success be after all this pathetic degradation? After a night of writing, I would get drunk and imagine myself being interviewed in front of an auditorium full of my fans, telling self-deprecating but touching anecdotes about my ragged days before I became a literary success. The audience, full of bookishly pretty young women would titter and sigh as they related to my struggles and admired my unwavering determination. What fantasies I had. There were other times when I knew that I was just comforting myself with delusions of grandeur, that I was trying to romanticize my lazy failure of a life by pretending to be a struggling artist on the verge of success. Really, I was just a lazy drunk on the verge of fuck all. I wasn't even some proud rebel drunk like Charles Bukowski. I hated myself. I didn't write enough, or read enough, or know enough, or work hard enough to be a real writer. I'd never read Anna Karenina, or 100 Years of Solitude, or anything by Henry James. I was often bored when reading, and bored when writing. Did I even like it? I'd half-assed my way through school and work and relationships. I'd half-assed everything I'd ever done. And I was even half-assing something that was supposed to be important to me. I hadn't even finished one novel after 6 years. And then there was the most damning evidence of all. My writing sucked. Sometimes I felt like I was a fraud. Sometimes I felt like I was on the right path. Sometimes I felt like both of these things were true at once, like I was on 2 different separate timelines simultaneously. My view of the matter, it changed often. At night, I tended to regard myself as being on the very cusp of fame and fortune. The next morning, I tended to wake up feeling like an untalented dilettante. Meanwhile, this supposedly temporary period of struggle stretched on and on and on. I turned 30. Surely something would happen by 40. But what if it didn't? As I withdrew from my friends and co-workers and became more of a recluse, I rationalized it as concentrating on my writing. Except my busy schedule of drinking and hangovers didn't really allow for much writing. The story of the struggling artist was showing itself to be a lie. Then I got fired from my job and sent to rehab. After I stopped drinking, I used my newfound energy and spare time to finish the novel. I finished it in a few months. You can get a lot done when you're not entering the void every night. For someone like me, the completion of 6 years of struggle is an occasion which simply begs to be accompanied by a drink, by many drinks. I'd always planned to just get drunk for an entire week after I finished my novel. Instead, I took a walk down to a nearby bar and stood outside of it for a while. I didn't go in. In my head, my life seemed to be developing into a new story, a heroic turnaround in which I got sober and everything fell into place. Yes, surely this was how it would go. I sent letters to 30 literary agents with the hopes of getting the book published. None expressed any interest. It hurt to be rejected. I'd stopped drinking, but I still hadn't found a fulfilling job. I was able to talk to people and look cashiers in the eye again, but I was still a recluse. I had still invested a lot of desperate hopes into getting the novel published. I felt so foolish for investing so much hope into something that's just so unlikely. But I couldn't help myself. The lure of feeling some sense of purpose and accomplishment was just too much. I wanted to be noticed. Honestly, I wanted to be rich and famous. Though they may have been disguised as achieving artistic success and finding my purpose, perhaps my dreams were ultimately as crass and grasping as any Kardashians. I'd given the literary agents 4 months to respond to me before accepting that they weren't interested. Soon after I passed that deadline, I started writing this web series. As you may know, a few websites wrote articles about the series, and some very lovely people created a very wonderful subreddit about it, and this drew the attention of people in the publishing industry. They contacted me, and just like that, my long-held dream was again revived. And now, it seemed more in reach than ever. I'd been struggling to contact agents, and now they were contacting me. Oh, what a heady feeling. Again, it felt like everything was falling into place, like my life was shaping into a story with a happy ending. Speaking of endings, I need to come up with an ending for the series before I could finally take my rightful place as the leading light of the literati. A few people on the subreddit had expressed doubt that I could possibly deliver a satisfying ending, and I was becoming inclined to agree with them. I'd already noticed that the story was easier to write when I was opening narrative threads than when I was wrapping them up. What would the overall ending be? It had to be about Mother. That was the center of the story. But what did I really know about Mother beyond a few vague memories? I'd long puzzled over these memories. Back when I was drinking, I was convinced that something had happened to me one summer, something beyond my understanding, something monstrous. But after I got sober, I was encouraged to digest some hard truths about myself, and I decided that it was entirely possible that I had more or less made it all up. Not that I simply lied to myself, but more that I had latched onto some vague memory, perhaps a recurring nightmare, and built it up in my mind over the years, perhaps as an explanation for why I was so emotionally fucked up. It was easier to face life as a victim of some unknown half-remembered evil. It gave me an excuse to crawl into the bottle. I needed to provide a satisfying ending to the series and to my quest to get published. Being intertwined, both of these tasks rested on a hazy collection of sinister memories. Then again, couldn't I just make some shit up? Hadn't I been doing that all along? The solution presented itself to me one night when I was talking with my roommate Sean. He had told me back when he smoked crack, he used to break into abandoned buildings to see if there was stuff to steal. He said that once he broke into a warehouse downtown and found a set of stairs that led to an underground room, which led to many more rooms that went deep underground. Over the course of a few weeks, he went deeper and deeper into the complex, taking various stuff, but always leaving quickly because it was a spooky place. On the last night that he snuck into the complex, he found a room where the walls were covered in human bone. 83rd post. A double take. So, there I was on the front porch with Sean, both of us sitting in rickety old chairs slapping away the mosquitoes, when he mentioned, quietly, that he had once seen a room where the walls were covered with human bone. Right away, my heart started thumping in my chest. He must have read my Reddit posts. This was something that I'd been worried about, even dreading. My posts were none too flattering of him, and he was a very private person, very defensive of his boundaries. He would see it as an intrusion and a betrayal. I'd taken great pains to obscure the details of his identity, giving him a new name and a different sort of Afrocentric religion. Nobody would recognize him from my posts, but some of the stuff in my writing had been taken verbatim from our conversations. If he saw them, he would surely recognize himself. Sean was not a guy I wanted to piss off. When he first came to the house, he told us that his main character defect was his temper, and he wasn't kidding. On more than one occasion, I had watched anger build up inside of him until he'd ended up chewing somebody out. It was the sort of scene that left me tiptoeing back to my bedroom, giddily thankful that I wasn't taking the brunt of his outrage. See, all those years as a recluse had left me with no appetite or ability for confrontation. Sean had been sincerely working on his temper. He was the only black dude in the house, and he was worried about being seen as the angry black guy. He often said to me, "You get up in somebody's face and they'll be like, 'Say, fellas, let's work this thing out.' But if I cross the line, they'll be like, 'Call the police, you're gone crazy.'" I had assured him that this was not the case, while not being entirely sure that this wasn't the case. As a result of his fears, he'd become very indirect about how he expressed his anger. If he felt somebody was disrespecting him, he would give them the silent treatment for a while, then come down hard on them for something small, all the while being very careful not to raise his voice or make any threatening gestures, which somehow made him more intimidating. As much as he didn't want to play out the angry black guy stereotype, I didn't want to play out the meek, affronted white guy stereotype, but I was sometimes intimidated by him. So now, when he told me about the walls covered with bone, I figured that he must have been feeling me out, seeing if I would come clean about what I'd written. But it was such a strange way to do it. I didn't know what to say. I looked him in the eye, trying to make my face completely neutral, and he gazed back at me, his face half in shadow, half colored by the yellow porch light, his expression dead serious. He went on, speaking softly. Skulls, teeth, arms and hands melted together on the walls, up on the ceiling. So there I was on the front porch with Sean, both of us sitting in rickety old chairs, slapping away at the mosquitoes, when he mentioned, quietly, that he had once seen a room where the walls were covered with human bone. Right away, my heart started thumping in my chest. He had seen in real life what I'd only seen in my mind. He was about to tell me the flesh interfaces and Mother and all the other nightmares were true. I had, on some level, known this was coming. It was the culmination of the strange feelings that I'd had all week. It started when I was sitting in that AA meeting, looking at the sad face of the old man with the stolid haircut. I'd entered a strange and sudden reverie, carried away by the sheer damn poignancy of this man's haircut and how it symbolized the sort of strong, upright man that he had tried and failed to be. I saw him in a great shifting vision, different versions of him emerging and overlapping. Here he was a young boy learning how to use a comb. Here he was a young man, the wind ruffling his sturdy locks as he experienced that rush of confidence that comes with his first drink. Here he was in front of the mirror running that comb through his wet hair with a shaky hand dropping it into the sink. Here he was with stitches just below the hairline after another accidental fall. Here he is, finally, face down at the bottom of his stairs, his hair ever so slightly mussed, just a few strands out of place. Almost perfect. The next day, my roommate Donnie, the ex-Marine, and I went out to the river to swim. It was a perfect sunny day, and there were a lot of people out swimming and floating along in inner tubes. As I lay back in the cool water, feeling the warm forest air alive on my wet skin, I saw, for a moment, that vanished primeval world peopled by the forest children, those children living along the river, not working or toiling, but simply taking what the river offered, living and dying by the good mother's generosity. Sure, they wouldn't know the benefits of writing or agriculture, and they'd drop like flies to horrible diseases and predators, but in doing so, they would accept their humble place in the universe, rather than striving to overcome it through science or religion. They would know themselves to be fragile things which lived for a brief moment, and then died, like glimmers on the river's water. For a second time in as many days, I found myself with tears in my eyes over some trivial moment, and I was forced to turn away from Donnie as he related a story about a Marine buddy who'd been given a humorous nickname by the platoon due to his uncanny knack for finding and acquiring venereal disease. In AA, they talk about not struggling or trying to manage everything, but rather letting God manage it. Not believing in an interventionist God, I had to interpret this as simply trying to accept things that I cannot change. I saw a vision of my life where I was able to accept life's vicissitudes with humility and grace, and where life opened itself up to me as a result. With it came this wave of nostalgia. The last time that I'd felt like this, I'd been in college, and I was taking a lot of acid. How long had I shut myself away from life? In that goddamn apartment with that goddamn bottle. I'd been unable to accept any discomfort or unhappiness, so I had avoided everything except liquor. I'd tried to control my feelings, and as a result, I'd found discomfort and unhappiness like I'd never imagined. But now, I could accept life, embrace life, welcome all the awkwardness and the frustration and pain and indignities. How many opportunities were right at my fingertips? I could talk to one of these girls wearing the smart bathing suits and be married in a few months, or just be a friend, or be hired as staff writer for some kind of magazine. Anything was possible. I saw now the glowing door open before me. I saw all doors open. All doors open and aligned one after another, and behind them all there was what? I couldn't say. The insight slipped away without revealing itself, but the fading reverie left a warm glow, and I dipped my head back into the cool water and looked up into the sky crowded with bright, weightless clouds. I could see now that so many things were coming together in my life. I was getting sober. I was learning to talk to people. Even the dream of being a novelist, the dream, was coming true. So now, when Sean told me about the walls covered with bone, it seemed like yet another thing was falling into place. But this time it was something sinister, something so awful I thought it couldn't be real. Now it seemed that whatever force was bringing my dreams into life was also acting on my nightmares. I looked Sean in the eye, trying to make my face completely neutral. He gazed back at me, his face half in shadow, half colored by the yellow porch light, his expression dead serious. He went on, speaking softly. Skulls, teeth, arms and hands melted together on the walls, up on the ceiling. I asked him, very carefully, "Is this something you read about on the internet?" He shook his head and said, "No, man," and looked down into his lap. I needed to find out exactly what was going on, even if it meant giving myself away, so I asked him, "Have you been reading my Reddit posts?" He squinted at me and asked, "Reddit? What's that?" So, it was real after all. 84th post. Children, welcome to the correlation game. A full-scale interface portal below a highly populated urban center. In the early days of flesh interface technology, this would have been considered utter madness. The uncontrolled incident zone would have resulted in mass segmentation and total chaos. And looking back on the experiment, madness was in fact the result. But for a brief time, It seemed like an idea worth exploring. It all started one day when a mid-level analyst was navigating a 3D map of Honduras Contained Interface number 2 and felt an urge to go to the bathroom. Just as she was getting up from her desk, she was struck by an overwhelming realization. But before we get to that, you must understand some background information. First, building an interface below a populated city was now possible because we had learned how to control the size of incident zones. We could create interfaces with incident zones that only existed in the interface tunnels, instead of being a large, uncontrolled zone all the way around the interface. This was achieved through a breakthrough involving signal cables. For years, we thought the interfaces had little appetite for anything but flesh. Machines and other objects were ignored. They weren't incorporated into the interface superstructure and did not seem to undergo any significant travel. But the Chinese figured out that the interfaces were willing to incorporate electromagnetic signal cables. If a live transmitting cable was sent into a phages corridor, the cable was taken up by the cilia and connected directly into the interface's nervous conduits. At this point, we could send and receive signals to and from the interface. You can imagine our excitement. We had a working example of seamless techno-organic integration. This would naturally become the basis for direct sense feed technology. Back in those early days, we had no idea what the interface did with the signals that we sent to it, nor could we make much sense of the signals that it sent to us. All we knew was that it loved signals, the more the better. The more cables we hooked up, the more information we sent and received, the smaller the segmentation zone would become. As computing and signal technology advanced, we were able to reduce segmentation zones to the area within the interface tunnels themselves. Finally, we had a relatively safe and stable flesh interface. Still, we had no reason to consider building an interface below a city until our mid-level analyst made her startling discovery. Before this, we knew that the size of a flesh interface depended chiefly on one factor: how much flesh it was provided. But at a certain point, the interface would cease to grow, even if it was provided with ample building material. We wanted to know why. Why had the Novaya Zemlya and Artigas portals grown so large when other portals were offered more flesh but failed to grow? In addition, we wanted to know what factors shaped the configuration of the interface tunnels, the so-called ant farms. At that point, we knew only a few basic facts. The tunnels would form either underground or underwater, but not in the atmosphere. The underwater tunnels were much larger than the underground tunnels, generating more segmentation and requiring more signal transfer to quell the segmentation. While the interface tunnels avoided the surface, they had little regard for the composition of the rock, sand, or soil that they were tunneling through. They tunneled through everything at a rate chiefly determined by how quickly we fed them flesh. It wasn't possible to observe the tunneling process, but it must have happened via segmentation because the dirt and rock was removed and simply disappeared. The tunnels were self-supporting and would remain in place even if the surrounding earth shifted, unless they were wholly exposed to the open air, in which case they would putrefy. But why did the tunnels take one configuration or another? What our mid-level analyst discovered as she traveled through the 3D digital recreation was that the route she was taking was strangely similar to the trip that she took to the bathroom every day. It was an odd little route through a poorly designed research facility, which included a short flight of stairs and a switchback at the end of the hall. All of this was reflected in the ant tunnel. Forgetting for a moment about her desire to use the bathroom, she took an emergency escape map off the wall and compared it to the ant tunnel she was studying. The layout of the Honduras research facility, which was just a few hundred meters from the interface entrance, was quite different from the layout of the interface tunnels. But there were certain similarities which went well beyond coincidence. The analyst's discovery spread quickly through the facility, and the analyst herself was given minor promotion along with a new office. It was discovered that the interface tunnels did not occupy the architecture of the research building, but rather the most frequently used paths and most frequently occupied rooms within the building. That is, the copied layout of human activity within the building. But even this it did in a distorted, oblique way, repeatedly copying and multiplying certain sections of the layout, as if the building map was being viewed through a multifaceted lens. For the people working in the facility, the discovery was nothing less than eerie. Shortly after the newly promoted analyst moved into her new office, a new section of tunnel was created within the interface to reflect this. No longer were the analysts detached observers. It was clear that on some level they were being observed and copied for some inscrutable purpose. A quick comparison of the interfaces and nearby human-occupied research facilities revealed unmistakable parallels. Huge facilities such as Zemlya Novaya tended to produce huge interfaces. This even held true for the undersea interfaces such as Artigas, where the nearest facility might have been many kilometers away. The correlation was stupefyingly obvious once we looked for it, and it set off a wave of crazed speculation. People started theorizing that the interfaces were affected by all sorts of things. The mood of the office, how much coffee we drank, the health of our potted plants. This period of wild speculation came to be known as the correlation game, as almost anything was proposed as a possible correlation. Most of the speculation came to nothing, but there was one idea that gained some traction. What if we built an interface in a highly populated area and gave it unlimited flesh material? How big would it get? 85th post. Do you believe the things I'm saying? Or do you just think it's the crack talking? There's this abandoned warehouse that everybody knew about. I knew it had evil spirits when I first went into it, but the crack had me thinking nothing could touch me. Even the other crackheads didn't like to go in there, except the ones who'd really fallen off. Those ones you see standing around just staring through the wall. But I'm up in there like I got God's protection, I don't fear anything. But really, it's just that crack talking. I start looking around, and I find some stairs in the back. At the bottom is a steel door. Thing is big, solid, deadbolts, everything. Somebody had already went at it with a sledge, but it ain't moving at all. You think there's crackheads in there every night and they still ain't broken through that door? That's a solid door. So where I was working at, I knew my boss had a spreader, like some Jaws of Life shit. So the next night, I took it, and I broke open that door. Inside was just a little room with block walls and another door. Same big-ass steel door. And there was a smell, that underground smell, but also like how when the spirits are unclean and they make a stank. That smell. I broke open that next door, and it's a hallway with another door. I just keep going through the place, breaking open doors, but it's mostly empty. Just some desks and computers too old to sell. I was like, shit. So, I took the doors, sold them for scrap. Heavy-ass metal doors. The reason nobody got in them doors before is because a crackhead can't hold on to something like a hydraulic spreader. That thing was like $400, you sell it. A crackhead will just sell the spreader. He ain't gonna fuck with those doors when he can just get his $400. I still had some discipline. I was smoking rocks, but I still had some discipline, so I'd put it back in the morning before my boss saw I took it, but that crack had me going. So, one day, I sold the spreader too. My boss never figured out it was me who took the spreader. I was so damn slick. Then things happened with me and my wife, and I stopped smoking for a while. Things were going alright. She acted like I was going to see my kids, but nah. I'd forgotten all about that old warehouse, but just as soon as I forgot, I looked in my boss's trailer, and there he had another spreader. I was like, damn. I didn't even want to look at it. I'd been clean for 2 months, but that crack was whispering. It got me again, and I was back down in that warehouse. I was just breaking open doors, going room to room. There was always stairs, more rooms. I kept going deeper. I found a room full of cages, a real big room, like a pound. I was glad, because it was a lot of metal, but in the last cage, at the end, do you believe the things I'm saying? I know you don't believe in God. I know you don't care about the Jews or the Gentiles. The Bible's real, but it happened a long time ago. People have forgot. That's why they carry on like they do. They don't know. And it's just when people forget, that's when the Lord comes again. And He'll punish us for all these iniquities, all these evils we do. Days to come will be full of terror. The Lord will chastise us like little children. Anyway, smell was real strong in that room, that evil smell. I knew what I'd find before I found it. There was some bones in that last cage, little bones, curled up in the corner, but still with clothes on. I got out of there. I was gone. I wasn't ever going to come back, but God. I came back, and I chopped up those cages, took them all out, just kicked them bones out on the floor. Came back the next day and broke into the next room, and there was more cages, all of them full. I was supposed to be back in my old house with my wife and kids, but I was down in that room with all these little skulls and hands. That's the insanity. It wasn't even worth the money, but I kept going back. There was always one more door, one more room, just a little more money. I ain't even think about where them bones came from, who killed them, who put them into cages. I didn't care. Then I found the room with the bones on the walls, and I was done. That last night, I was way down there, way underground. I open up a door. Inside there's a cave. The other rooms had block walls, but this was like a mine. I shined my flashlight around, and up ahead I thought there was crystals on the walls or something, but it was bones. I mean, people, hands, skulls, ribs, all of it just shoved together. And it went on and on. I said, God, this is the valley of the shadow of death. I knew I wasn't scared of those spirits because they were already inside me, telling me, don't worry, telling me, keep going back down in there. I prayed to the Lord to deliver me, and I got scared right there. Spirits came out of me, and I got scared. I won't lie, I was crying, just shook up. I knew I wasn't alone in there. I could feel the evil one down in that tunnel. It was all power in the dark. The spirits of those dead people were all formed together to form up that body of the evil one. It formed a beast. It wanted me to bow to it, to bow to the idol. But I didn't. I didn't bow. I ran. I was gone. That was my moment of testing. I didn't bow, but for a minute, for a little minute, I could feel all that power. And I smelt another smell, different from the other rooms. I remember. My daughter's more grown now, but when she was little, I'd feed her applesauce. I've been thinking about her when I smell it. And I smelt it then, coming out of the dark. And God, I wanted to bow. Yeah, sometimes, even when the alternatives are there, we still balk at taking them. This could be because of any number of failings we have: laziness, cowardice, lack of drive or ambition. But it could also be self-preservation, and not being dumb enough to dive into the meat grinder. Stay scary, wildlings. Try and keep your bits in their factory settings, and make the most of your nights.